I got ideas for the imagery from Spaceship. From Spaceship. Okay, and then spinning off metaphysically from everything that's connected to issues of space and ships and spaceships. If you've ever read any of the metaphysical poets, particularly John Donne, for example, The Valediction Forbidding Morning, or any of the Holy Sonnets, you have, or The Flea, you have poems that employ what were then new scientific terms within a metaphorical structure of associations that are interconnected so as to be a metaphysic of imagery. And it's that kind of thing which governs the selection of images within Spaceship. There's a wonderful moment in one of the episodes of I Love Lucy, in which Colonna, I can't remember his first name, an individual is on playing a famous writer whom naturally Lucy wishes to corner and ask questions of, because she's reading his work in a book club. And they're both on the same ship. Isn't this wonderful? It's a ship traveling through the ocean, an ocean liner. So she finally corners him and says, what does such and such stand for? So what do the hummingbirds stand for? They stand for hummingbirds. Let's see. Well, weapons generally are considered certain kinds of tactical armaments, but in the Spaceship, what is forgotten are these other kinds of weaponry which would be essential in, let us say, relationships. So that's what's been forgotten. You do need weapons in relationships. I think this poem was composed around the time we were dealing with the new millennium and the issue with computers about what would happen when you hit aught zeros and what occurs, will everything crash or not? Mm-hmm. And I probably appropriated that image about all the zeros rolling over from the anxiety among computer scientists at the time. One of the difficulties in dealing with any kind of image when you're making a poem is that the image may convert itself into a symbol for something larger than the image, what the image itself refers to. With Spaceship, I was interested primarily in the notion of that spaceship that was sent just out there with the little human figures in it and some kind of greeting in it for the possibility, were it to contact any other life or life forms out there, in a kind of desperate attempt to reach or contact some civilization intelligent enough to match our own or be better than our own. the loneliness and isolation of that gesture. I'm a fan of I don't know if you could call it science fiction, but it might be a kind of speculative science that's done in fictional form by the Polish novelist Stanisław Lem. And Mr. Lem picked up on this notion in a novel called His Master's Voice. What happens if the signal we send out there actually is responded to, if we get an answer? Scientists get very excited in this novel about the fact that there is a systemic repetition of data which indicates that there is some kind of concrete response coming in, but the meaning of that particular set of repetitions is not understood. So the challenge then becomes to decipher the message that's being sent back in response to the message that's being sent out. And the message that's being sent back is subjected to every kind of linguistic system that exists currently for analyzing codes, all of which ultimately fail to account for what this message is. Is the message actually simply a repetition of static data, or is it a real message, a conscious message? That remains problematic. So, what would we get in response to the spaceship as a message? Could we understand the message that we would get in response to the spaceship? Could we ever fully understand any kind of response from any civilization equal to or more intelligent than our own? That seemed to me an interesting idea. I think that to repair any technology, you cannot rely upon the technology. You have to have ingenuity. You have to have ingenuity. Sure. When I was at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, I created a set called 31 It, which are 31 stanzas with the preposition it. Okay? And gradually, whatever it means shifts in meaning. Okay? And then I had the audacity to add to the front card the line, "Feel free to add to the set." The American writer Donald Justice, for whom I composed this in his class, came back with his own stanza, which was composed of taking 2 lines from one card and 2 lines from another card and 2 lines from a third card and just putting them together to add an additional card. And so he added to the set. He also gave it all back to me, I think, after a month and said, "Take this away from me," because it was occupying too much of his time. He was becoming rather enamored of it. I had composed 2 some such sets, and then I composed a third when I was teaching in Kentucky on a different kind of project altogether. And then Spaceship came about, followed by Robot and another one that I wrote after that. Well, how do you find any direction in it? And the solution is to put a grid over it, which is in fact what science does. It imposes a grid over it, and thereby they can map space. It's vastness, assuming that it is vast. It's fullness and or emptiness, assuming it has either of those. And what can I assume about it? Space. I mean, space. I grew up with Star Trek. I'm that old. You know, I mean the first one. And space is the final frontier, isn't it? Isn't that the cliche there? And I was always expecting to get off the planet. I've gotten off the continent to, say, to China and come back, but I've never gotten off the planet. And I've wanted to get off the planet just to see what it's like to be off the planet, somewhere else, in space. And it's not going to happen. Maybe for you, it might happen. You never can tell. That'd be great, wouldn't it? The more the merrier. I think we're very limited to the book. I want to move beyond the book. Honestly, most of you are in this weird generation where you, A, surf the net. Isn't that an interesting metaphor? Surf the net. And B, you have interactive games, don't you? I don't play any interactive games. The notion of interactivity immediately involves the reader. And the business of the internet means that there's no ultimate point of stasis, because you can continue to surf, you can continue to find, you can spend hours on the net. How do I move off the book, which is stable, which is static, which has a notion that the reader begins at the top line and goes down to the bottom? How do I stop that? How do I get rid of that? How do I move out of the book into whatever could come next? And that is one way. Spaceship is one way. I don't think it is completely random, because it is a set of 22 stanzas.
Yeah,
so there's a mathematical limitation to the number of probable organizational patterns you can get out of it.
Right.
There's a limitation. If I say I didn't with this, feel free to add to the set, then I would open it up to an infinite number of, well, I don't know, maybe infinite number, but even within the set itself, there are limitations as to the metaphysic under which it operates, because this is a metaphysic of space and ships and spaceships. I would never assume that any writer, even of a stable text-bound piece, has a main thing, one theme. That comes from English classes. What is the theme of this? Did you have a high school teacher who did that to you? What is the theme for this? And did you ever get it wrong? Well, how could you get it wrong? You mean you had to guess what the teacher thought the meaning was? Well, that's not meaning. I mean, in the real world, honestly, when you read, you don't then have a teacher at your side who will tell you the meaning, right? You get a meaning out of it, and then you are satisfied with the meaning, or you are massively confused. You seem to be massively confused. I'm sorry. But I don't think that you should be massively confused. I think you should be enjoying it much as you would, a game of Clue or Monopoly. In fact, game systems. It's a game system. If I were in the field of science, I'd say that Spaceship is a game system. You play it. You win it because your brain says this. The endomorphins in the brain rejoice. You decide,
Okay.
of course.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand.
Again, for me, in the composition of it, it has to do with the metaphysic. I'm dealing with a metaphysic involving everything connected to what my brain associates with the scientific issues of space and the spaceship in space and the problems involved with that. So as soon as I've exhausted the metaphysics of that, I stop. Spaceship is the first of a set of 3 of these, and it defined the other 2 because I wound up with 22 stanzas, or 22 cards. And then the next set had to be 22, because this set defined the next one. And the set after that had to be 22. It would be idle to assume that these cards were never revised. That would be a very idle assumption, and very wrong, because I've played this thing numerous times, and in the process have revised many stanzas, whittled things down, thrown things out. When I find repetitions coming up that are too obvious, gotten rid of them. So the poem was written before it had a title. Okay? And the title is in itself perhaps the meaning of the poem, of the sensation, if you will, of what it means to suffer the loss of someone to whom you have been married for some considerable time. To take that widow's walk. And each of the stanzas is a sensation or an image, often image for me, image structure that is connected to the sensation of this grief and loss and suffering, and what is going on in the mind